Adam Merrill was alone in the wedding venue, pressing the last peony into a centerpiece that fanned outward in whites and blush pinks. His hands were steady. They always were. She came through the far corridor. Business clothes, no entourage. She wasn't here for the wedding. But she stopped at the table. Her hand drifted to a loose peony beside the arrangement. She picked it up and held it near her collarbone. Adam looked up, a half-smile. "You'd make a great bride." She didn't flinch, held the flower exactly where it was and smiled. "I would need a groom for that." Neither of them moved. She set the peony back on the table, turned, and walked out. Adam watched her go, then looked down at the flower she'd touched. He adjusted it back into the arrangement, but slower than before. A single dad who arranges flowers for other people's weddings. A CEO who just walked through his door without knowing what she's about to take from him. Stay. Adam opened the shop at 6 every morning. Same routine. Unlocked the front door, turned on the cooler fans, filled the buckets at the back sink. By 6:15 he was at the work table, trimming stems for the day's orders. The shop was small glass storefront on East Broughton Street in Savannah, a hand-painted sign above the door that read Merrill Florals, and a single work table in the center made of reclaimed oak that he'd built himself. Nothing about the place said money. Everything about the arrangements did. Josie came in at 3:30, the way she always did. Backpack on one shoulder, lunchbox swinging. She dropped both behind the counter, pulled up her stool, and started sorting the leftover ribbon scraps from that morning's wedding order. She arranged them by color, then by width, then folded each one into a small bow and tucked it into the edges of bouquets that hadn't been picked up yet. Adam never corrected her technique. He just watched from across the table while his hands kept working. 3 years ago, this shop didn't exist. 3 years ago, Adam was a senior landscape architect at Callaway and Briggs in Atlanta, designing public parks and urban green corridors for municipal contracts across the Southeast. He was good at it. His Forsyth Corridor proposal for the city of Savannah, a linked greenway connecting 4 historic squares, had been selected over 11 competing firms. He'd spent 4 months on the plans. He'd also filed a historic preservation nomination for the East Broughton block as part of the project, arguing that the row of 19th-century commercial buildings qualified for the Savannah Historic Register. Then the firm collapsed. The founding partner was indicted on 14 counts of embezzlement. The contracts evaporated. Adam's department was dissolved in a single afternoon, no severance, no transition, no warning. Just a locked office and a box of personal items on the sidewalk. He moved to Savannah with Josie. Not randomly. He chose the Broughton block because he'd studied every building on it. He knew the brickwork, the roof lines, the original storefront proportions. He'd written a 20-page nomination arguing for their preservation. This was the place he'd tried to protect, and now it was the place he needed. His wife had passed a year before the firm went under. There was a framed photo behind the register her, standing in a garden somewhere, squinting into the sun. Josie straightened it sometimes when she thought Adam wasn't looking. He always was. Laura Kent had been CEO of Ridgeway Properties for 2 years. Her father built the company on a simple principle: develop with the community, not over it. When he died, the board expected Laura to move faster. The East Broughton Corridor redevelopment, a mixed-use project spanning 6 blocks, was the test. Residential, retail, office space. Demolish the old, build the new. The board wanted shovels in the ground by spring. Dale Harmon had been handling the groundwork. VP of Acquisitions, promoted 5 years ago after serving 3 years as Ridgeway's community liaison on the city's Historic Review Committee. He knew the bureaucracy, the zoning rules, the pressure points. He'd been clearing tenants from the corridor for months: code complaints, inspector visits, pressure letters. Laura had approved the project's scope. She hadn't approved Dale's methods. Adam had received the development notice 2 weeks ago. A single sheet of paper, Ridgeway Properties letterhead, informing him that his building was in the target zone for the corridor project. Helen Pryor, the woman who ran the bookstore next door, leaned over the counter and told him she'd gotten the same letter. "They want us out by November," she said. Adam didn't answer. He pinned the notice to his corkboard, right next to Josie's ribbon bows, and went back to work. Late that week, his phone rang. A woman's voice, professional, clear. She said she'd found his business card at a wedding venue and wanted to order arrangements for her office. Weekly deliveries, mixed seasonal. Adam took the order. She asked about the centerpiece she'd seen at the venue, the one with the peonies. Said it was the best she'd seen in years. He said thank you. The line went quiet for a second too long, then they both hung up. He didn't know her name yet. The Civic Center was half full on a Tuesday evening. Folding chairs, a projector screen, a long table at the front with microphones and water pitchers. The city planning open session for the East Broughton corridor had drawn the usual mixed property owners, neighborhood reps, a few reporters, a handful of residents who'd gotten letters. Adam sat in the back row. He hadn't planned to speak. He wanted to hear the timeline, understand what was coming, figure out how much time he had left. Laura Kent walked to the podium at 7:15. She wore a dark blazer, no notes in her hand, and spoke from memory. The screen behind her showed renderings, glass facades, rooftop gardens, pedestrian bridges. She walked through the phases. Demolition would begin on the eastern blocks first. Residential relocation was already underway. The Broughton stretch was Phase 3. Midway through the timeline slide, she scanned the room the way a speaker does when recalibrating pace. Her eyes passed over the back rows and stopped. Adam saw her at the same moment. The woman from the wedding venue. The voice on the phone, standing behind a podium with Ridgeway Properties projected 6 feet tall behind her. Laura held the pause for less than a second, then looked back at her slide and finished the sentence without stumbling. Her voice didn't waver, her hands didn't move from the podium edges, but something behind her eyes recalculated the way a driver's expression changes when a light turns yellow and there's no time to stop. Adam sat still, his hands resting on his knees. He listened to the rest of the presentation, the way you listen to a forecast for a storm you're already standing in. Phase 3 included his block. Demolition projected to begin in April. The rendering on the screen showed a glass and steel structure where his shop currently stood. The oak work table, the ribbon bows, the framed photograph behind the register replaced by a co-working lounge, with exposed ductwork and pendant lighting. After the session, the room thinned out. Laura stepped off the low stage and walked toward the hallway where the exit signs glowed green above the double doors. Adam was standing near the far wall, jacket over one arm, not moving toward the door. She stopped in front of him. "Are you a resident in the corridor?" "I own the flower shop at 412 East Broughton." Laura pulled up her tablet. She scrolled, tapped, scrolled again. Her expression didn't change, but her thumb stopped moving. 412 was flagged. Holdout property. Dale's notes in the file read, "Non-compliant, unresponsive." "I'm not unresponsive," Adam said. I responded. The answer was no. Laura looked at him. The hallway was empty now. The janitor was stacking chairs in the main room behind them. She could hear the metal legs folding and the chairs clicking into the cart. "I'll review your file personally," she said. Adam nodded once. Then he turned and walked out through the side door without saying anything else. He didn't thank her. He didn't argue. His footsteps faded down the corridor and the fire door clicked shut behind him. Laura stood alone in the hallway with her tablet still open to his file. The building was emptying around her, the last few attendees pulling on jackets, the projection screen going dark in the main room, the janitor's cart squeaking toward the back. She understood that his silence wasn't evasion. It was a position, the kind that doesn't need volume. What she hadn't expected was the man from the wedding venue, the steady hands, the half smile, the peony standing between her and a 6-block demolition schedule. What he hadn't expected was the voice on the phone belonging to the company trying to take his building. And neither of them had a plan for what to do about it. 2 days later, Laura parked on East Broughton and walked into the shop. The bell above the door rang once. Adam was at the work table, stripping thorns from a bundle of long-stem roses. His sleeves were pushed to his elbows, and there was a small cut on his left thumb that he hadn't bothered to cover. "I wanted to see the property before I make any decisions," she said. He didn't stop working. "Look around." She did. The front room was narrow but clean. Glass cooler along one wall, buckets of loose stems on the other, the oak work table in the center. The arrangements on display had structure asymmetrical, layered, built with an eye for proportion that had nothing to do with flowers and everything to do with spatial design. "Did you study design?" she asked. "I was a landscape architect," Adam said. He pulled another thorn and dropped it into the bucket without looking. Didn't elaborate. The past tense sat between them, heavy and deliberate, like a door he'd closed and wasn't planning to open for a visitor. Laura moved to the back wall. Old sketches were pinned there, park layouts, streetscape elevations, planting grids done in precise pencil on heavy drafting paper. Professional grade work, tacked up with pushpins next to crayon drawings on construction paper. She leaned closer to one sketch. A corridor plan linked green spaces, pedestrian flow arrows, canopy coverage calculations. The drafting style looked familiar. It matched a renovation proposal she'd seen in city records during her first year as CEO. She took a photo of the sketch with her phone. Adam noticed. He watched her thumb press the shutter, then went back to the roses. He poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot on the side counter and set one on the work table across from her. They sat. She asked about the block, how long the other tenants had been there, what the corridor used to look like before the vacancy notices started going out. "I'm not trying to erase it," Laura said. "I'm trying to build something that works." Adam turned his coffee cup once. "It already works." She finished her coffee, set the cup down exactly where she'd found it on the same ring of condensation it had left on the oak surface. At the door, she paused and looked back at the wall of sketches one more time. The corridor plan hung between a streetscape elevation and one of Josie's crayon drawings, a purple house with a yellow sun and 2 stick figures holding hands. The drafting paper was fading at the edges. The crayon was bright. Adam was already back at the roses, his hands moving at the same steady pace they'd been moving when she walked in. He didn't look up when the bell rang behind her. The inspector showed up on a Thursday morning. City Fire Marshal's office, clipboard, badge on a lanyard. Dale Harmon had filed the request 2 days earlier. The inspector walked the shop, methodically checked the cooler wiring, the breaker panel, the emergency exit clearance, the sprinkler connections. He found one violation. An outlet behind the walk-in cooler wasn't up to current code. 14-gauge wire on a 20-amp circuit. The inspector tagged it, handed Adam the form, and said he had 30 days to fix it or face a daily fine. Adam fixed it in 2 hours. He pulled the cooler away from the wall, cut the old wire, ran new 12-gauge through the conduit, replaced the outlet and the breaker, and called for re-inspection before lunch. The inspector came back that afternoon, tested the circuit, and signed off. He looked at the wiring job for a long moment. It was cleaner than most licensed electricians would have done. Dale told Laura the holdouts were costing them months. He recommended eminent domain paperwork, fast-track it through the city attorney's office, put the legal pressure on before the next board meeting. Laura said no. She said it once, flat, without explaining. Dale pressed. The board wouldn't wait forever. She told him that she wasn't going to force residential tenants out of buildings they'd occupied for years, and if the board had a problem with that, the board could take it up with her directly. That afternoon, Laura drove to Adam's shop. He was behind the counter, logging an order on his laptop. She stood across from him, hands in her coat pockets, and waited until he looked up. "My VP proposed eminent domain on your block this morning," she said. "I blocked it." Adam's hands stayed on the keyboard. He didn't type. "You didn't have to tell me that," he said. "I know." She left. Adam closed his laptop lid slowly. He sat with his coffee and looked at the door she'd walked through, at the glass where her reflection had been a second ago. Something had shifted, not in the situation that was the same, in the way he was calculating who she was inside it. Back at the Ridgeway offices that evening, Laura pulled Dale's tenant contact logs for every property in the corridor. 3 buildings on the western end had vacated within the same 2-week window. Each had received a code complaint letter within days of the first vacancy notice. Identical language. Identical inspection requests. She flagged the files and locked them to her access only. The reception was on a Friday evening. Ridgeway Properties was hosting investors and city officials in the ground floor atrium of their downtown building, polished concrete, glass walls, a long bar along the south side. Laura had asked Adam to handle the florals. 12 arrangements, neutral palette, delivered and set by 5. Adam arrived at 3 with his van. He carried each arrangement in himself, didn't use a cart, didn't rush. He placed them on the tables, the bar, the reception desk, adjusting each one until the spacing was right. He worked the room the way he used to work a site plan, measuring proportions by eye, stepping back, shifting a vase 2 inches to the left. He was packing his tools when he realized he'd left his cutting shears on the ledge behind the last arrangement in the atrium. He went back. The floor was dimming down, cleaning crew in the far corner, a few early arrivals near the bar. He found the shears and was reaching for them when he heard Dale Harmon's voice from a side office. The door was half open. Dale's tone was loose and comfortable, the kind of voice a man uses when he thinks he's alone. He was talking numbers, per-unit demolition costs, a bonus structure for fast clearance, a contractor's name Adam didn't recognize. Then, the Broughton block. 4 buildings. If we get the green light by October, you're looking at 40% above the standard rate. Adam picked up his shears. He didn't stop, didn't linger, didn't look toward the office. He walked out of the atrium, down the service corridor, and into the loading area. Laura found him there 20 minutes later. She'd come down to check the arrangements before the guests arrived. The loading dock was empty, just Adam's van and the last shipping box. "They look good," she said. She meant the flowers. "Thanks." They stood there. The evening was warm, the way Savannah evenings are in early fall, heavy, slow, the kind of air that settles on your shoulders and makes people talk without deciding to. The dock lights hummed above them. Somewhere inside the building, the reception was starting, glasses clinking, heels on concrete, the murmur of small talk that sounded like weather from out here. 10 years ago, Laura said, I thought I'd be building my own firm from scratch. Something small, something mine. I had a business plan and a notebook. I used to sketch floor plans for the office I'd rent, second floor, corner unit, big windows. Adam leaned against the van. What happened? My father died. His board didn't. She crossed her arms. The board doesn't care about corner offices. They care about returns. The corridor project is the test. If it delivers, they let me run the company the way I want. If it doesn't, they'll find someone who will. Adam was quiet for a moment. 10 years ago, I thought I'd be designing parks in a dozen cities. Instead, I'm cutting peonies at 5 in the morning. He looked at his hands, the small scars from thorn pricks, the permanent callus on his right index finger where the shears pressed. It's not worse. It's just different. A car passed on the street beyond the gate. The sound faded and didn't come back. Adam reached into the box behind him and pulled out a single white ranunculus, a leftover from the evening's arrangements. He trimmed the stem with his shears, quick and clean, and held it out to her. Laura took it. Held it between 2 fingers the way she'd held the peony at the wedding venue. The same grip, the same stillness. He closed the van doors, got in, and pulled out of the lot. Laura stood on the loading dock with the ranunculus in her hand, watching his taillights turn left onto the street and disappear. She was still holding it when she went back inside. Everything Laura thought she knew about the man at 412 East Broughton was about to change. And everything Adam assumed about the company trying to take his building was about to surface in a file no one had opened in 8 years. The next week, Laura couldn't set it down. The sketch on Adam's wall, the corridor plan, the drafting hand. She'd seen that style before, not in Adam's shop, but in city records. The Forsyth corridor renovation, 8 years ago. A linked greenway proposal that had won a competitive bid before the firm behind it collapsed. She'd studied the project during her first year as CEO, when she was learning the history of every major development Ridgeway had touched or competed against. She pulled the city's archive design records on a Monday morning. The original submission was filed under Callaway and Briggs, Atlanta. Lead architect on the corridor plan, Adam Merrill. Laura sat back in her chair. She read the name again, then a third time. The same Adam Merrill who trimmed peonies at a work table on East Broughton. The same hands that arranged wedding centerpieces had drawn park elevations for a municipal bid worth $3 million. She kept scrolling. Attached to the design submission was a secondary filing, a historic preservation nomination for the East Broughton block. Adam had submitted it as part of the corridor project, arguing that the row of commercial buildings at 400 through 418 East Broughton met the criteria for the Savannah Historic Register. Original brickwork, cast iron storefronts, intact cornice lines dating to 1881. He'd included a 20-page architectural survey, a photographic inventory, and a letter of support from the Savannah Historical Society. The nomination had been received by the city 8 years ago. It had never been processed. Laura pulled the routing history. The filing had been assigned to the city's Historic Review Committee for evaluation. The committee had 5 members, including 1 representative from each major development firm with active projects in the historic district. Ridgeway's representative at the time, Dale Harmon, community liaison. The file had been marked incomplete missing survey attachments and transferred to the city's archive storage. No rejection letter was issued, no appeal window was opened, no notification was sent to the submitting party. The procedural violation was clean and deliberate, a filing killed quietly, without the paper trail a proper denial would have created. Laura checked the original filing against the archive record. The survey attachments were there, all 20 pages, photographs, measurements, structural assessments. The filing had been complete from the day it arrived. She picked up her phone and called Adam. He answered on the 3rd ring. "The corridor plan you submitted to the city 8 years ago," she said. "The one for Forsyth. I found a copy in Ridgeway's archived records. The drafting style matches the sketch on your wall." Silence on the other end. Then, "That was a long time ago. Did you also file a preservation nomination for the East Broughton block?" A longer silence. "I did. The city never responded. I assumed it didn't qualify." "I know why they never responded," Laura said. "I'll explain when I can. Not yet." She hung up. Adam held the phone against the work table for a moment, then set it down and looked at the sketch on the wall, the same corridor plan he'd pinned up 3 years ago when he moved in, the same lines he drew when he still had an office with his name on the door. Laura called Ridgeway's legal counsel that afternoon. She asked one question. Can a historic preservation nomination be reactivated if it was improperly shelved by a review committee member who falsely marked it as incomplete? The answer was yes. If the original filing was intact, if the submitting party was still eligible, and if the procedural violation could be documented, the nomination could be resubmitted with a petition for expedited review. Laura closed the file on her screen. The demolition plan for the Broughton block, her demolition plan, had been legally preventable for 8 years, and the man who'd tried to prevent it was now the last tenant standing in its path. Laura asked Dale to her office on a Wednesday afternoon. She closed the door, sat across from him, and opened a folder on her desk. "I found the Broughton block preservation nomination," she said. "Filed 8 years ago. Your name is on the review committee routing." Dale looked at the folder but didn't reach for it. That filing was incomplete. Standard procedure. Standard procedure requires a formal rejection letter and a 30-day appeal window. Neither exists in this file. Laura turned a page. The survey attachments, the filing was marked as missing. All 20 pages are in the original submission. They were there when you marked it incomplete. Dale shifted in his chair. "That was 8 years ago, Laura. The committee handled hundreds of filings. The committee handled 47 filings that year. I checked." Dale changed direction. He leaned forward, lowered his voice, and put both forearms on her desk. The gesture was meant to look collaborative. It didn't. "Laura, listen to me. If you reactivate that nomination, the corridor project stalls. The timeline blows out by 18 months minimum. The board will move on you. You know that. You've been CEO for 2 years. You think they won't find someone who'll knock those buildings down without a second thought?" "I'm ordering an internal audit," Laura said. "Every tenant displacement in the corridor, every code complaint, every inspector visit, every vacancy, going back 18 months. Dale's hands went flat against his thighs. He didn't argue further. He knew what an audit would find. The demolition contractor, the per-building bonus, the phone calls from his office with the door half open. That afternoon, Dale went to the board chairman directly. He told him Laura was stalling the corridor project because of a personal relationship with a holdout tenant. He used the word conflict of interest twice. The chairman took the call and said he'd look into it. Laura was faster. She requested an emergency board session for the next morning. She presented the buried nomination file, the routing records, Dale's name on the committee, the missing rejection letter, the complete survey that had been marked incomplete. She told the board that Ridgway had suppressed a valid historic preservation nomination 8 years ago, and that if the submitting party, an active tenant in the corridor, currently served with demolition papers, brought it to litigation, the company's exposure would be severe. Not theoretical, severe. The board voted to pause demolition on the Broughton block, pending a full internal review. That evening, Laura drove to East Broughton. The shop was closed, but the lights were still on. She could see Adam through the glass, sitting at the work table. Not working, just sitting. A cup of coffee in front of him, his hands wrapped around it. She stood outside the door for a moment. Then, Adam looked up and saw her through the window. He walked over, unlocked the door, and held it open. He didn't ask why she was there. He didn't say anything at all. He walked back to the work table, pulled out the second chair, the one that had started as a place to stack supply catalogs and had slowly, over the past few weeks, become hers, and set a glass of water down across from his coffee. She sat down, wrapped both hands around the glass. The condensation ran over her fingers and pooled on the oak surface. They stayed like that for a long time. The street outside went quiet. The cooler hummed. The shop smelled like eucalyptus and green stems, and the particular stillness that comes when two people stop performing and just sit in the same room, breathing the same air, not needing the silence to be anything other than what it was. The next morning, Laura came back. She carried a manila folder and set it on the work table next to Adam's coffee. Adam opened it. Inside was a photocopy of a city filing form, his handwriting, his signature, dated 8 years ago. The preservation nomination he'd written for the East Broughton block. 20 pages of architectural survey. Photographs of the storefronts, the brickwork, the cast iron columns. Every attachment present and accounted for. He turned the pages slowly. He hadn't seen this document in 8 years. He'd submitted it and waited. Then the firm collapsed, and he assumed the city had reviewed the nomination and decided the block didn't qualify. He never followed up. There was no one to follow up with, no firm, no letterhead, no standing. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "In Ridgway's archive. My VP sat on the review committee when this was filed. He marked it incomplete, said the survey attachments were missing. They weren't. All 20 pages were there. No rejection letter, no notification to you." He moved it to a storage shelf and left it. Adam set the folder down. He pressed both palms flat on the table and looked at the wall of sketches across the room. His jaw tightened once, then released. "I'm resubmitting the nomination under your name," Laura said. "With Ridgway's full support, the block qualifies. It always did." "This kills your project," Adam said. "It changes my project." She pulled her tablet from her bag and set it beside the folder. A revised site plan filled the screen, the Broughton block preserved as the corridor's central anchor, the new mixed-use development built in an L shape around it. Pedestrian access routed through the historic storefronts. Green space threaded between the old and new structures like a seam holding two fabrics together. Adam studied the plan. His eyes moved the way they used to move over blueprints, scanning for flow, for proportion, for the places where design, intention, and physical reality don't align. He pointed to a gap between two of the new buildings on the eastern edge. "This needs a canopy corridor," he said. "If you break the pedestrian line here, you lose the connection between the retail frontage and the park access. People won't cross that gap in the rain. They'll go around." Laura looked at him. She hadn't heard him talk like this before, not about flowers, not about the shop, not about anything. This was the other version of him, the one the firm collapse had buried. "Then design one," she said. Adam looked at the tablet for another moment, then back at her. His hand was still resting on his own signature from 8 years ago. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. What happened next would decide whether the Broughton block survived and whether the man who'd tried to save it 8 years ago would get the chance to finish what he started. The board met on a Thursday morning. Conference room on the 9th floor, long table, 8 chairs, water glasses lined up like sentries. Laura stood at the head and presented the revised corridor plan, the preserved Broughton block, the L-shaped development, the integrated green space, the pedestrian canopy. She walked through the financials, the adjusted timeline, the legal exposure the original plan would have carried into court. Then, the audit results. Dale Harmon's file. The demolition contractor, a company called Greer Clearance, based in Pooler, had a side arrangement with Dale, per building bonuses, for fast-tracked demolitions. 3 fabricated code complaints used to pressure holdout tenants into vacating early. A historic preservation nomination suppressed through a documented procedural violation. Every item cross-referenced and verified by Ridgway's outside counsel. The board voted 6-1. Dale Harmon was removed from his position effective immediately. The revised corridor plan was approved with a new timeline beginning in February. Dale stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked out of the conference room without speaking to anyone. No one watched him go. Laura drove to the shop that afternoon. It was almost 4. The light on Broughton Street was turning gold the way it does in Savannah in late autumn when the angle drops low enough to hit the storefronts straight on. Josie was at the back counter. She had a row of small paper bags lined up in front of her, each one filled with dried lavender and tied with a strip of ribbon. She was folding the tops down carefully, pressing each crease flat with her thumbnail. Laura knelt beside her. "What are you making?" "Lavender bags. For the farmer's market on Saturday. $1 each." "I'll take 3. Laura put 3 ones on the counter. Adam was in the doorway between the back room and the shop floor. Arms crossed, leaning against the frame. He watched Laura count out the money, watched Josie line up 3 bags and push them across the counter with both hands. Then Josie reached under the counter and pulled out a 4th bag. She set it on top of the others. "That one's free," she said. "Dad says the best ones are free." Adam's arms stayed crossed. His expression shifted, not quite a smile. Something closer to the look a person gets when a thing they've carried quietly for a long time shows up in someone else's hands and fits. The Broughton block went on the Savannah Historic Register on a Wednesday in January. The announcement was small, a letter from the city, a notice in the Savannah Morning News, a plaque that would be mounted on the corner building in the spring. No ceremony. Just a piece of paper that said the buildings would stay. Construction on the revised corridor started the first week of February. Cranes appeared 2 blocks east. The sound of pile drivers carried across the rooftops in the morning and faded by afternoon. The old buildings on East Broughton stood where they'd always stood, freshly pointed, newly painted, the storefronts cleaned and restored with funds from the development budget Laura had redirected. Adam's shop had a new sign. Same hand-painted style, same lettering, but the wood was fresh cedar, sealed and hung on wrought iron brackets he'd welded himself. Inside, the work table had expanded. One end was still covered in stems, shears, ribbon spools, and order slips. The other end held rolled drafting paper, a laptop open to a site plan file, and a set of architectural pencils he hadn't touched in 3 years until last month. He was consulting on the corridor's green space design. The canopy walkway he'd suggested, a covered pedestrian corridor linking the preserved block to the new park access on the eastern edge, was in its second round of engineering review. His name was on the plans. Not as a florist. As the landscape architect, he'd never stopped being. Laura came by most mornings now. She parked on Broughton, walked in with 2 coffees, and sat at the work table across from him. They reviewed site plans, argued about setback distances, debated the species list for the canopy plantings. She wanted native oaks. He wanted a mix oaks for shade, crepe myrtles for seasonal color, magnolias for the lower canopy. They hadn't agreed yet. Neither of them seemed in a hurry to. Josie was there before school. She'd placed a small bouquet on the counter near the register, white ranunculus and dried lavender, tied with a piece of the same ribbon she used for her market bags. Laura noticed it when she set her coffee down. She looked at it for a moment, then touched one of the ranunculus stems with her fingertip. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Adam walked Laura out to her car at 8:15. They stood on the sidewalk in front of the shop. The block was alive, a delivery truck idling at the corner, 2 runners passing on the opposite side. Helen Pryor sweeping the entrance of her bookstore next door the way she did every morning, regardless of whether the sidewalk needed it. Groundbreaking ceremony is next month, Laura said. Will you come? I'll bring flowers. She smiled. The same smile from the wedding venue, unhurried, unguarded, the kind that starts before the person decides to let it. Adam looked at her. Then he said, You know, you still would. Laura tilted her head. Would what? Make a great bride. She held his gaze. The street noise continued around them, the truck, the runners, Helen's broom scratching across the concrete. I told you, Laura said, I'd need a groom for that. Adam didn't say anything. He reached over and tucked a ranunculus stem behind her ear, the one that had slipped loose from the bouquet she'd touched inside. The same motion, the same steadiness, with which he'd adjusted the peony she'd set down at the wedding venue months ago. His fingers brushed her hair and stayed a half-second longer than they needed to. Laura didn't move. She let him. Inside the shop, Josie stood at the window with her lavender bag in one hand. She watched them for a moment, the two of them standing on the sidewalk in the morning light, the restored block behind them, the sound of the city building itself back up around the things it had decided to keep. Then she turned back to the counter and started folding the next bag. Some things aren't drawn on paper, they just take root.